Diabetes Connections is brought to you by One Touch. Every touch is a step forward. By Dexcom. Take control of your diabetes and live life to the fullest with Dexcom. And by No Foods. No grain, no gluten, no guilt.
This is Diabetes Connections with Stacey Sims.
This week, letting go of your college-aged child. A challenge for many parents, even without type 1 on board, especially during those first few weeks away.
And I'm seeing her numbers all over the place. So I, unfortunately, was texting her every few minutes or calling her. And finally she said, "Mom, can we talk tonight?" And I said, "Sure." So she called and I said, "I think I'm in trouble." And she said, "I understand that you care and you want to help me, but you really can't call me and text me every 5 minutes throughout the day."
Karlyn, Gale, and her daughter Courtney, who's now a senior, share how they make it work without texting every 5 minutes. And we'll talk about the top fears parents have for these students, according to a College Diabetes Network survey. Plus, how one of my worst diabetes parenting moments became one of my best. This one's kind of ugly. I'm not proud, but I think it may help. This podcast is not intended as medical advice. If you have those kinds of questions, please contact your healthcare provider. Welcome to another week of the show. So glad to have you along. You know we aim to educate and inspire by sharing stories of connection when it comes to type 1 diabetes. My son was diagnosed right before he turned 2. He is now 13 and a half. My husband has type 2 diabetes, and I have a background in broadcasting, local radio and television news, and that is how you get the podcast. You know, right now, I think pretty much everybody is back to school. My kids have been in school for nearly a month, but I thought this would be a good time to talk about college. You know, drop-offs are still actually finishing up, and we've talked about elementary school, and we've talked about daycare before. Teens are their own animals. We've got episodes on that as well. But the timing seems right, and College Diabetes Network, a terrific organization, shared some survey information with me about the top fears of parents. So we're going to address that in just a couple of minutes. Happy New Year for all who celebrate. We are in the midst of the Jewish High Holy Days, so Lashana Tova to you. And I know that Beyond Type 1 and Project Blue November, two terrific organizations, usually put out carb counts for all the holidays. So I'll link up those as well, because you want to have your apples and honey and you want to be able to dose for it. That's traditional for the Jewish New Year. So you'll have a sweet and a happy one. I mentioned a diabetes parenting moment I'm not too proud of, but I learned from it, and maybe you can too. That'll come up later in the show. I want to make sure to get to all of this college information. There's a lot of it, and it's a longer interview. We've got 3 people here in just a moment. But first, Diabetes Connections is brought to you by One Touch. Handwriting your blood glucose levels is the ultimate throwback. The One Touch Vario Flex Meter seamlessly syncs with the free One Touch Reveal mobile app to create your dynamic electronic logbook. And when you choose the One Touch Reveal mobile app, you'll be joining thousands of other people living with diabetes. In fact, as of this past October, One Touch Reveal was the #1 downloaded diabetes management app in the US, Canada, France, and the UK. To upgrade today to the One Touch Vario Flex Meter and the One Touch Reveal mobile app, visit diabetes-connections.com and click on the One Touch logo. The College Diabetes Network is singularly focused on providing young adults with type 1 the peer connections they value, the expert resources they need to successfully manage the challenging transition to independence at college and beyond. I am reading from their website, of course, but the resources that CDN offers are vast and deep. If you haven't been to their website, I highly recommend that you do so, and I will, of course, link it up in the show notes. Of course, you can get to the show notes on any podcast app or at diabetes-connections.com. If you're listening through Facebook or social media, hop on over to a podcast app. I guarantee it's a better experience for you, and you can get all the show notes that way. But if you like listening through Facebook, hey, that is great. Please continue to do so, however it is easiest for you. But the point here is that I just want you to know about the information from CDN, and so much of it is better read than listened to. We're going to cover a lot here, and if you have questions, I just want to make sure that you can go back and find what you need. My guests this week are Stacey Cunnington. She's with the College Diabetes Network. She was diagnosed type 1 in high school. And she is going to walk us through the top fears that parents have reported to CDN and also give us some help and guidelines as we have this conversation with mom and daughter. Karlyn Gale is the mom. Courtney Gale was diagnosed type 1 in high school, and she is now a senior in college, and they are going to take us through the experience, good, bad, and otherwise. So Stacey and Courtney and Karlyn, thank you so much for joining me. A lot to talk about here. I appreciate you spending some time with me and my listeners.
Yeah, definitely. We're excited.
Stacey, let me start with you because this has got to be a really busy time for back to school, obviously, with the College Diabetes Network. What's keeping you busy this time of year?
Yeah, it's actually been super busy, which is really exciting. Just on my end, at least, we've been kind of connecting all these new students with new CDN chapters on their campuses and getting them set up with all the resources they're going to need for the year, which also includes their parents. So we've been just really keeping busy, kind of sending those materials out and getting everyone connected with what they need to be connected with. And yeah, just kind of seeing those first few chapter meetings starting to be planned and kind of carried out on campuses. So that's really exciting right now. So we're all keeping super busy.
It seems like CDN is really growing. Do you have any numbers on how many chapters?
Yeah, so we have over 125 chapters now, but that is growing very fast as well. In the last month, we've had, I want to say, over 10 or 11 new chapters alone. So I'm expecting that number to grow hugely over the next few months.
Wow, that's really great. It's wild to see how it's grown. So let's talk about the back-to-school stuff that people need to know. And we're really excited to have an actual college student with type 1 diabetes. Courtney, thank you so much for joining us. And you're a senior this year. Could you share with us, though, when were you diagnosed?
So I was diagnosed in May of 2013. So it was right around finals time in high school, my sophomore year.
And you say right around finals time. Were you thinking maybe you were just stressed out?
I thought it was stress. I was right in the middle of going to prom, semi-formal. I was in a play at school. I was doing a lot of sports. I was 6 months away from being in the Macy's Day Parade. So I had a lot going on in my life. So I was like, being exhausted seems normal. And then after I had multiple symptoms, I'd been going to the doctors, I think 8 times in a month. And they were like, you got to stop coming here. And then they did the blood work and saw that I was like in the 400s, I think.
All right, back up though. The Macy's Day Parade?
Yes, I danced in that 6 months into having diabetes, which was the most fun and stress I've ever had.
Was it a school group?
Yeah, so it was with my dance studio. Every 4 years, she sends the oldest group off. So a team of us went to New York, and it was really, really cool. Mom had to walk next to me because they didn't know how to administer glucagon, so they were nervous in case. So my mom was throwing gummies at me while I was in the parade. So it was quite a fun time.
Karlyn, what was that like for you? You got to be in the Macy's Day Parade. Were you waving at people, or were you just too focused on your daughter?
I was too focused on my daughter. They didn't actually let me know that I was going to be walking in the parade until about 11 p.m. the night before the parade. They called me in the hotel room and said, how would you feel about walking in the parade? We aren't comfortable at this point, and we want to make sure that someone is still focused and watching out on her. And so I said, I'm fine with that. So they scrambled and got me a staff jacket, and they told me what I needed to wear. And thankfully, I had all of those items, the white sneakers, the black pants, and it was a last-minute thing. So as part of the Macy's Day Parade, you're not on TV until the very end, so you're doing just a lot of walking. And the whole entire time I was looking at the Share app and looking at, all the CGM data, and I was handing her gummies, and she said, Mom, I'm about to be on national TV. And I said, I don't care, eat the gummies.
That's great.
So it was quite an experience. And actually, when you're in the parade, you're mostly running. Everyone is running, and you don't see that on TV until they actually perform. But it was just constant running for miles before she was on TV. So it was quite an interesting adventure.
Yeah, no doubt. Wow. So diagnosed sophomore year, 2.5 years maybe, a little bit less than that before she went to college. Do you mind, Karlyn, telling us what your thoughts were that freshman year? You know, maybe put yourself in the shoes of parents who have freshman kiddos who have type 1 diabetes going off to school right now.
So I didn't want to send her to college. She was diagnosed, like she said, at the end of her sophomore year, and I thought to myself the whole entire time, how am I ever going to send her off to college? I just can't. I mean, at that point, when she was first diagnosed, we didn't have a CGM. She didn't have a pump, so we were doing the injections. I was waking up 2 to 3 times in the middle of the night to check her blood sugar and give her juice and, go through that process I think everyone does when your child is first diagnosed. And I sat there and said, there is just no way that I can send her off to school. And then as it got closer, we attended some conferences and learned a little bit about the College Diabetes Network that gave us some information, and we got involved in their Facebook pages. And I said, okay, well, I can do it. So we did it. We did it, and we ran, and here we are in senior year, the blink of an eye.
Wow.
And we've done okay.
Courtney, were you thinking of staying home, or were you looking at your mom saying, I'm out of here?
I knew I wanted to go off to college, and I knew I wanted to live at school because I wanted that kind of social experience. But just based off of my personality, even way before the diabetes, I was a huge homebody. So I ended up going to a school. It's about 30 minutes from home. So it was kind of like, it wasn't really a compromise. It just worked out that way, that I'm far enough away where I can live at school and flourish and have my own room and all of that. But I can also have mom come get me and bring supplies if need be. So it kind of worked out well, that close enough to home but far enough away.
Stacey, let me go over to you and ask, is that pretty common? Do you find that a lot of parents kind of have that worry and then find CDN and other resources and kind of latch on to other parents?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's super common, and that kind of story that they just told rings true with me as well. I mean, I literally mirror her exact story. And I think parents are kind of either in this 2 different boats. They're either in the mindset, I don't want my child to go to school. I want to keep them as close as I can. I want them to go to the school down the road so I can keep an eye on them. And then there's other parents who say, the only way they're going to learn how to do this on their own, I'm going to let them, fly 3,000 miles across the country and figure it out on their own, and that's how they're going to do it. So I think the most important thing for parents, in my experience, from what I've seen at CDN, is just kind of latching onto each other and kind of bouncing ideas off of each other for what works for different types of families, because no 2 family situations are alike, and no 2 needs of a student with diabetes are alike. So some students are going to learn their best and do their best when they're 3,000 miles from their parents, learning everything on their own, and others are going to do their best when they're 15 minutes from home and they can, go home whenever they want and refill supplies and lean on their parents a little bit. So I think kind of that's super, super common to see parents connecting through all of these online communities, like the CDN Facebook group that we have, and just kind of learning from each other and just being a support system for each other.
And forgive me, Stacey, I should have asked, when were you diagnosed?
It's funny. I was diagnosed my sophomore year of high school during finals, just like Courtney.
Oh, my God.
Yep, it's pretty crazy. And then I ended up going to school 30 minutes from my house. So it's actually like the exact same story.
Twins.
That's very funny. Did you go 30 minutes from home because of diabetes or because that was your college choice?
So that was actually my college choice. And like kind of Courtney said, it just kind of happened to work out because I always knew I didn't really want to be far from home because I am a homebody, like Courtney said. But I did end up transferring after a year, but I only went like an hour away from home. So it was still kind of the same deal where it just worked out for me. Like I was so newly diagnosed, but at the same time, I still just wanted to be so close to my family, diabetes or not.
So one of the things that you were kind enough to provide me with was a look at what parents are thinking. This was a survey done by College Diabetes Network about the top fears that parents have about their kiddos at college. And I don't think any surprise. We'll go through these here. And I want to bring this up not to just say, well, that's a fear, but obviously to talk about what we can do about this to ease the fear. Maybe we talk about the logic behind it, the thinking behind it, and what we can practically do to address it. Right back to more about college and diabetes in just a moment. But first, Diabetes Connections is brought to you by Dexcom. And, I remember in elementary school, even in preschool, Benny, he has never been self-conscious about diabetes. He would show his friends how it's all done. He would check. He would dose in the middle of class. He once showed all his friends in the baseball dugout how the pump worked. He really never minded. But he is in 8th grade now, and he is, very thankfully, still very comfortable with diabetes. He doesn't want type 1 to be the center of attention, and the Dexcom helps so much with that. Dexcom has made it so easy for Benny to simply glance at his smart device to give him his reading, and the Dexcom G5 was the very first FDA-approved device to let you make treatment decisions without pricking your finger, and of course the G6, which we're using now, no calibrations at all. And you don't have to worry about acetaminophen anymore. You can take Tylenol with the G6 just fine. I am thrilled with it. Benny is thrilled with it, which is really the most important thing to me. Find out more. Just go to diabetes-connections.com and click on the Dexcom logo. Now back to more of our conversation about college, parents, and diabetes. Let's go through the top 5. I'll read them and then maybe we can kind of address them. So number 1, of course, is nighttime lows. Number 2 is parties and alcohol, then sick days, then running out of supplies, and glucagon administration really rounds out the top 5, kind of tied with not staying on top of care. So we'll give it top 6. So let's go from the bottom of those to the most common, starting with not staying on top of care. Now, I'm going to give that to you, Courtney, to start with, because I think it's a lot to ask, to stay on top of care perfectly. But, what is your advice for freshmen to try to kind of keep things going?
I have to say the hardest thing is coming to the realization that diabetes is not a science. You are just never going to have weeks on end where your blood sugar is perfect all the time. And I think you need to be okay with that, and you need to understand that as long as you're, giving yourself your insulin, you're trying to correct, you're adjusting to a new environment, new food, new social factors. So you need to kind of let yourself have time to let your blood sugars adjust to that. I think keeping your parents involved is really important. I think to what degree is up to each person. And it's also an important factor of how much you want people on campus to know. Like, you are in control of how you want it to be known. I think just making sure you're kind of doing it your own way and the best way that works for you will help you kind of stay on top of it more.
Karlyn, any thoughts on kind of staying on top of care, keeping it a routine maybe?
So keeping routine, but as you know, in college it's really hard to stay on a routine. Courtney and I had come up with a plan, and with my husband also, when she first came to school, and we could mention that in a little bit, but as part of our plan, we weren't really supposed to talk to her during the day, and the first several weeks, she's adjusting to school, I'm adjusting to her being away, and I'm seeing her numbers all over the place, so I, unfortunately, was texting her every few minutes or calling her, and finally she said, "Mom, can we talk tonight?" And I said, "Sure." So she called, and I said, "I think I'm in trouble." And she said, "I understand that you care and you want to help me, but you really can't call me and text me every 5 minutes throughout the day." And she said, "You don't know that I may have just had a piece of pizza and that I just took 10 units of insulin, and I don't know the minute-to-minute things that are happening on campus." So we had a little bit of an adjustment period where I kind of had to get used to that. And I said, you know what? She knows what she's doing. She has control. It's not going to be a perfect science until she gets adjusted and used to this college routine. And it's hard, but you have to take a little bit of a step back, knowing and hoping that they're going to figure it out on their own.
Did you stay following on the share? Have you stayed as she's been through college this whole time?
Yes, because she does not wake up to her lows. So we are involved at nighttime. During the day, we're not involved. She takes care of it, but at nighttime, we're her backup.
All right, we'll get there because that is the number one fear. Let's ask about glucagon administration. And Stacey, let me give this to you. Is there a standard operating procedure for college and glucagon? Do you train the roommate? Do you train the RA? I mean, what do people do?
Yeah, so unfortunately, there really isn't a standard operating procedure in place for glucagon, and nobody is legally required to administer it. So a lot of parents kind of go in with the mindset, oh, the RA will, by law, have to give my kid glucagon if they need it, which is totally not true. It's totally just a voluntary thing. So I think kind of what we recommend is going in and having that conversation with roommates and the RA and explaining what glucagon is, what it'll do for a person if they need it, that it can really be the difference between life and death in an emergency, and kind of explain in very simple terms what the procedure is like to administer glucagon. And we find that 99% of the time, somebody around the student, whether it's in a dorm or a friend or somebody on campus, will be willing to administer glucagon in an emergency. So if the roommate or the RA isn't comfortable doing that and they end up finding somebody else on campus that is, whether it's like a coach or another friend or somebody else kind of not close, we've had students post that person's number up above their bed. So if there is an emergency, the roommate or the RA can call that person to come help with the glucagon. So that's kind of what we recommend, but there really isn't like a one-size-fits-all approach to the glucagon conversation and who will be administering glucagon if there is an emergency.
Courtney, does that sound kind of what you did?
For the most part, I think I kind of just brought it up with my friends, my roommates, and I kind of, went a little lighthearted about it. And I was like, oh, I have type 1 diabetes. It doesn't really hold me back, but if you see me with syringes, this is why. And then I kind of just went along the lines of call 911 and then call my parents when it came to the glucagon. But we ended up having such an open relationship that over time they were kind of like, well, could we administer the glucagon if we had to? And they kind of started asking more about it. And I Velcro one to the top of my door, and then I always keep one in my bag. So as people were coming over, they were like, oh, what's that Velcroed above your door? Like, what's that red thing you always have with you? So it kind of organically came up in conversations, which was nice, but I did mention it to them beforehand and let them know it was something that I had.
I don't mean to jump in with any advice because I have a high school senior. We're actually looking at colleges right now. My daughter does not have type 1, and I have a 13-year-old who does have type 1. So I have not experienced any of this. But over the years of doing this podcast, the one consistent thing that adults have told me about college, the best advice that they say, and you touched on it, Courtney, is have your friends know what's going on. Once you make some friends and get yourself established, tell them, be upfront with them, because it's your friends that are going to know you best and be around you the most. And we'll talk about that again when we talk about partying and alcohol. But that's what their advice was. So even if your roommate isn't trained on glucagon, as Stacey said, or even Courtney, when you're talking about your friends, that's a great resource. And I got to say, man, just listening to this, it makes me, that nasal glucagon that's up in front of the FDA right now, that'll be so nice because they say 95% of people, even without any training, can do it no problem. It's just a squirt. So that would be great to have.
I think that'll definitely change the conversation around glucagon because people will be so much more willing to help because it's not a big, scary red box with a big needle.
Exactly. It's terrifying. Let's talk about running out of supplies. Now, this is something that even at home, Karlyn, I don't know about you. I'm sure you're the perfect diabetes mom, but every once in a while, I will forget something. Any advice for making sure your college student has what they need? Can you tell us what you all did?
Sure. I do take care of all of her supplies because I thought that just adjusting to college and all the stresses that you have to deal with, I like to alleviate wherever I can. So I do handle all of her supplies and ordering of them, and I found that keeping most of them on the automatic refill is really the best thing because we have forgotten from time to time. Fortunately, we are not that far away, so there have been nights at 11:30 at night, midnight, that I popped in the car to drive either, a bottle of insulin or test strips or whatever it might be up to her. But I think really keeping everything on the automatic refills just to make sure it's always there. And then Courtney is the one that gets all the text messages from the pharmacy saying your supplies are ready, and then she can go pick them up locally.
Yeah, kind of a hybrid of her responsibility and your help is something
Right.
something that a lot of parents I have talked to have done. And Courtney, do you have stuff in your room? Do you try to, do you have I'm trying to think I know Benny would just throw everything in a box under his bed, with his socks and his dirty stuff. But I'm assuming that you probably have a nice setup with, drawers or something like that. Do you have a way to kind of help you keep track of what you have?
Yeah, so I have one of those wheeled 3-drawer plastic bins that's in my closet, and in the top drawer, my mom and I go through and do Ziploc bags of full pump site changes. So it has the cartridge, the needle, the site change, so that I can just easily grab one, and then I keep an extra box of the site changes and the Dexcom changes. And then in the bottom drawer, I have all of my extra meters, test strips, ketone strips, all of that. So I kind of start getting leery once I run out of those plastic bags. And that's kind of my hint to text my mom and say, do I have supplies coming soon? And then I also have one of the really big plastic bins underneath my bed that has extra boxes of everything in case I completely forget and totally run out of everything. I have some backup.
Stacey, I got to assume CDN has some checklists.
Oh, yeah, we have every checklist imaginable. We have one that would be really helpful in this situation is our packing to go to school checklist, because it has everything you're going to need for a semester pretty much. So every site change, syringes, low treatments, even to things like cold medicines without acetaminophen for people that are on the Dexcom, and tea bags and Gatorade, just everything you could ever think of. So we have all of those PDFs on our website. So that's a really, really great resource for when you're kind of packing up all those things to go to school.
I'm going to start this next one with you. This is number 3, parent fears when it comes to college, and that's sick days. And I'm going to assume that this is when you get sick and you have diabetes. You get the flu,
right.
You have a bad cold, and you have diabetes. Any recommendations or guidelines that parents should know? I'm thinking about things that would be covered by a 504 in high school and middle school. Anything like that in college where you could miss a class because of that? I'm not sure what to ask here. Can you talk about sick days?
Yeah, so it's kind of twofold. So the one side of it is getting the accommodations on campus, registering with disability services, so you don't have to deal with your professors when you are sick, pretty much. So instead of spending your time when you're sick arguing with a professor about if you can miss class or not, or if you can miss a test, if you have those accommodations in place, it's going to be no problem. All you have to do is just shoot them an email, let them know that you have those accommodations in place, which they should already know by the beginning of the year, and you will be all set. And then the second part of that question, I think that parents are most worried about, is that the whole sick day angle where, when somebody with type 1 is sick, you can get ketones way more easily and even DKA. So I think that's a really big worry for parents, especially with things like stomach fog or food poisoning when you're throwing up. So I think the big worry with parents is I've taken care of my child, while they're at home, monitoring them for ketones when they're sick, and I know what to do, but will they know what to do when they're sick at school? So what parents tell their kids a lot of the time in regards to sick days, if they're going to listen to one thing about it, is if you start throwing up, go to the emergency room right away. No questions asked, to avoid DKA and ketones and all of that stuff. But a good rule of thumb is if you are sick, whether it's throwing up or otherwise, no, you can't turn off your basal rate completely, because even if you are low because you're throwing up, your body needs insulin or you will get ketones. So try, even if you're low, to sip Gatorade, something so you can give a little bit of insulin, and just stay on top of touching ketones as much as you possibly can so you can avoid that. But yeah, other than that, it's just pretty much that fear and just having, the right supplies in place for sick days. So whether that's cold medicine or it's Gatorade for if they're throwing up, or, glucose gel or honey or something they can take really easily if they're low and throwing up and can't keep anything down. I think a really important one is those glucose gels or honey or cake icing that they can rub on their gums if they are throwing up and they can't physically swallow anything. So that's a really big one to keep in mind. So I think it's just kind of having the right supplies and a good plan in place.
Yeah, and I will jump in and say that DKA is about number 7 on this list. So I'm going to assume that most people kind of folded that into sick days, as you said, because they're afraid of the consequence of the sick days. Courtney, did you ever run into anything like that so far at school?
I haven't run into anything close to DKA. I have had the sick days. Obviously, when you go into college, you're exposed to all these new people, new environment. Like your body is going to, get sick and it's going to need time to adjust to it. But I think pretty much, what Stacey said, staying on top of checking ketones, making sure you are getting insulin, if you're having a pump malfunction that you're going to injections or vice versa, staying in contact with your doctors if you need to, kind of following those basics and just making sure you do stay on top of it. If you do have the option to go home, I would suggest that, because having your parents there can help, or keeping them clued in. But I think Stacey kind of hit the ball with that.
Yeah, I will say my son goes to sleepaway camp, non-diabetes sleepaway camp for a month every summer. And the one rule I always have for them, I've always told the staff, and if he throws up twice in 12 hours, I want a phone call. That's the one thing, as you said, Stacey, it is terrifying to think about the dehydration and things like that. So I'm glad we touched on that because, we obviously want to be careful when we're sick. And to me, I'm not going to editorialize too much. To me, the DKA, the potential of highs and illness, is actually scarier than the nighttime lows. But we will get there. Let's jump to number 2, which is parties and alcohol. Courtney, I'm not going to ask you too much personal information, but let me ask you, did you have this conversation with your parents? I hear your mom laughing. Did you have this conversation with your parents before you went to school?
So I did have this conversation, and it was actually brought up by my first endocrinologist. She sat down with me and my mom in one of our appointments and was like, we can't be naive. She's going to go to college. She's going to be exposed to things. And basically what we did is the summer before I went to college, I just tried a couple of drinks with my parents so that they could monitor how my blood sugars did, because alcohol affects each person differently, diabetes or not. So when you do have that diabetes factor, it can get a lot scarier if you don't know. So that's kind of my suggestion. If you have a good relationship with your parents, is just at dinner, have a beer, see what your blood sugar does overnight and the next day to kind of figure out what will work with your body the best. And clue your parents in. They probably assume you're going to get exposed to the alcohol, the partying, the social scene here. So just make sure they know if you are going to be drinking or not.
Karlyn, did you tell anybody you were doing that? I'm asking in that way because I think sometimes we're embarrassed as parents. I think it's a great idea, but I think as parents, sometimes we're embarrassed to talk about this stuff outside the family at all. I didn't mean to give you an answer there, but go ahead.
No, I'm not embarrassed at all. We actually, have a good relationship. We talk about everything. And I was thrilled when her endocrinologist at the time said, Mom, your job for you and your husband this summer is to drink with Courtney. And again, it's not encouraging underage drinking. It's making sure that they're going to be safe, because we know what they're going to be exposed to and we know they're going to try it. I would rather have her do it around us and be safe and have a plan and be prepared than to just go out there and experience it on her own. We had actually gone to a conference one time, and one of the girls was on a panel, and she said, everyone should drink tequila. And that point, and I said, oh my gosh, tequila. And she said, it's the most natural, and this is what works. And, but what you do have to be careful of is what works for one person, the next person does not have the same reaction. So that's why I think it's important to experiment in a safe environment.
Tequila. I agree. And Stacey, we should say, one of the big reasons that alcohol is such a concern isn't just because you can, lose control and not count carbs correctly. It's because the body will not kick in for a low, the emergency liver dump that we've heard about, where it releases glycogen, which then turns to glucose. That doesn't function if your liver is busy processing alcohol. I guess it prioritizes alcohol first. And so you can have a passed out with a low blood sugar, and your friends can just think you're passed out drunk. I know this is a touchy subject because we're talking about underage drinking, but let's just face it head on. How do you address this with CDN?
Yeah, so as you just said, I have to say CDN doesn't condone underage drinking,
right.
But we do know that students, of course, are going to be exposed to this. So there are two multiple concerns with alcohol. And one, it's that when you're intoxicated, you're not thinking about counting carbs, or you're not really feeling those symptoms of highs or lows. So that's dangerous in one right. But on the other side, alcohol does affect everyone differently. And we find that for a lot of people, especially if you're drinking at night and combined with exercise, whether it's like dancing or whatever, like people tend to go low hours later, even the next morning, from alcohol. So that's a concern for parents because that kind of feeds into the overnight low concern. But at the same time, the big one, like you said, is glucagon won't work if you've been drinking. So parents are obviously very concerned. Diabetes are not about alcohol and parties when their kids go off to school, because they're thinking, is my child going to make good decisions? Are they going to know their limits? Are they going to know what to do, if them or their friend has had too much to drink? And then when you add diabetes into the mix, it just completely adds to that fear, because then you kind of introduce sick days because you might be throwing up from alcohol. It introduces overnight lows. It introduces impaired function. So it kind of wraps a lot of those parent fears into one. But the most important thing we at CDN kind of think about drinking is to have the people around you know what to do and what to look out for in a person who is having a low blood sugar or a high blood sugar, or is acting kind of not themselves, because that's when you can step in and intervene and kind of figure out, maybe it's not just alcohol, maybe they're having a low or a high and they need help. So definitely just having people around you that know you have diabetes and know what to do at all times.
I wonder, too, how many of us really just don't want to address this at all and send the student to college thinking, my child doesn't drink. My child's not going to do that. I know.
Exactly.
Yeah. And Courtney, that doesn't work, right? I mean, even if you're not a big drinker, I would assume this is something that most of your friends have been exposed to, if you don't mind me asking you that.
Yeah, it's definitely, you're going to be exposed to it. I do have some friends who have gone on and been like, I don't want to drink and I'm not really into that scene, and that's fine. And I have other friends that have tried it and have stuck with it. I don't know what the right term is, but my rule is I always have at least one person out with me that knows that I have type 1. And me and my nurse educator came up with a rule that I am not allowed to consume alcohol if I do not have a medical ID on. In the event that something does happen, that people will be able to know, who to call, what I have, if EMTs need to get involved. So I do think having, it can be as flashy or minimal as you want, but having some sort of medical ID on and making sure, even if they're not with you, but if someone knows you're going out and that you have diabetes, just making sure someone is in the loop and that kind of knows what's going on, that can check in with you, or if you're out, say, check your CGM data. My roommate freshman year actually followed my Dexcom share for a while. If I did go out and wasn't with her, so that she could check on it, and she would get alarmed if she needed to call me, which was awesome.
Wow. That's great. And I wouldn't have thought about kind of making a deal or, talking about it that way. That's great advice. Thank you for that. Because it's just, these are things that I know are going to help other parents and students. So thanks, Courtney. I appreciate that. All right, let's tackle nighttime lows. Everybody is scared of this. Now, I've talked about this a lot before here on the show, because I do think, and I'm going to editorialize a little bit, but then you guys can set me straight. And you can follow up on this when Benny's in college. I think that a lot of the fear of nighttime lows are overblown by social media. I don't think this was as big a fear 10 years ago. And I think that it just kind of feeds on itself over Facebook. I will say that. I will say that nighttime lows, any low, it needs to be treated, taken seriously. Let's not kid ourselves. But at the same time, students are doing well in college, even through nighttime lows. Having said that, Courtney and Karlyn, how did you decide what would go on here? Because as we said, everybody's different. Everyone handles it in their own way. Sounds like you have a great relationship. And you talked about this because Courtney doesn't wake up. What did you decide to do?
So, like we said, we had that transition period freshman year because I couldn't wake up to alarms. So I did let them follow. And overnight, we kind of came up with a plan, so to speak. So they would call me once or twice. And if I woke up, I would be like, hi, I'm treating. It's fine. You can go back to bed. If I didn't answer the phone, I would talk to my roommate. If my roommate was comfortable with it, they would call my roommate to try and wake her up. And after that, it would be the Department of Public Safety, our on-campus police system that would get called. That did happen once, and it was mortifying. It was twice that they had to get called because I wasn't answering the phone or waking up.
Okay, so let me address this gingerly. Was it a good thing that they woke you up? Did you need to be awakened?
So I think it was a compression low.
Yeah.
So I don't think I was actually that low, but it was showing that I was in the 30s. So as frustrated as I was, I completely understand if I was a parent of my child going into the 30s, I would have done the same thing. But definitely having a uniformed officer stand over you at 3 o'clock in the morning saying your mom called was an interesting experience. But
I'm not laughing at the experience. You are a diplomat. I love listening to you explain this, Courtney. That's excellent. Karlyn, what was going through your mind? Because I've been there. I mean, my son was on a field trip to Washington, D.C., and he was, the low alarm went off. And I called him and I called the chaperone and nobody answered. And 5 minutes later, the arrow went up. So I didn't call, but I remember thinking, what the heck would I have done? Would I have called the hotel lobby? Would I have called the police? What do you do? So I hear you. What was, I don't even know what to ask you here because I think we all sympathize with that. How did you get a hold of the campus police or public safety? Did you have that number handy?
So we did. One of the things we did when we first dropped her off on campus as a freshman, I said to her, let's go talk to the RA and introduce ourselves. And she said, no, Mom, it's fine. So we got her set in her room and we said goodbye. And I went right to the residence office and I found out who the RA and the director was. And I introduced myself and said, please explain to me the process. If I need to get in touch with her because she has type 1 diabetes, who would I call? Are there phone numbers? And they explained that the system they have here is that there can be a different RA on every single night. So they said there's not one that's designated just to her floor or her dorm. So they said your best bet is to just call the Department of Public Safety if you ever needed to. So I put that phone number in my phone as well as health services, and then I immediately shared those phone numbers with Courtney, and I said, please put those into your phone. And she said, okay, thinking that we would never need to use them, but might as well have them just in case. So then that night, we usually, if she were to wake up, she would send an emoji, just like a smiley face or something silly, and that would let me know that she was awake and handling it. And if we don't get that, I wait about 15, 20 minutes. I'm seeing if she stabilizes, if she's continuing to decline, and that's when I start freaking out and texting and calling, and then I wake my husband up, and he starts texting and calling, and then we start calling her roommate, and then finally I get to the point where I sit there and say, I'm not willing to take this risk anymore. I'm not willing to wait anymore. So I called the Department of Public Safety that one night, and I remember when the officer answered the phone, I said, I just want to let you know my daughter is going to be so mad at me. And she said, what, Mom? She said, it's a mom's privilege. She said, let her be mad. And I said, thank you. I appreciate that. And they have EMTs on call 24 hours here. So they said, we'll just send someone over. It doesn't mean they're going to transport her anywhere. They're just going to wake her up. They said, what do you want us to do? Do you want us to have her call you? And I said, yes, that would be great. And then she said, and Mom, I need to add this. She said, parents always call to check on their kids, and they think they're actually going to be in their room. We just want to give you a heads up. She may not actually be in her room. And I sat there and said, wow, okay, we'll cross that bridge when we get there, right? A side note, after that night and after that officer who answered the phone mentioned that to me, I said, Courtney, I think it would be a great idea if you let me follow you on Find Your Friends, Find Your Family app. So we started that as well, so I can kind of see where she is on campus in the case of an emergency. I don't look at it, but if I ever did need to find her, there was another situation one time that we did, and so I can go right on the app and kind of see where she is on campus. So she's great like that to share that information. But she laughed that night when the police officer and EMT got to her room. She said, Mom, why is there an officer and EMT standing here? And so we kind of laughed about it, and all of her suite mates and roommates were up, and everyone had a good little chuckle, and she did what she needed to do to get her blood sugars back in check, and we all went back to bed.
Wow.
It worked.
Stacey, I'd love for you to weigh in here because, as we say, look, everybody does this differently. And as great a relationship that Courtney and her mom have, there's lots of kids and parents who don't have that relationship, frankly, who would freak out if a parent did that, who would be resentful if a parent followed them. How do you delicately deal with that through CDN? I imagine you've got lots of people with lots of differing views on this.
Absolutely. I would say the number one question we get is surrounding, my child won't let me follow them on Dexcom Share. They won't let me do this. They won't let me do that. They don't want me to call campus. How do I keep them safe from a distance?
Right.
And we like to emphasize that every family dynamic, everyone's different. So I think the most important thing to do before somebody gets to campus is to have that conversation about what the student is comfortable with, especially concerning Dexcom Share, because a lot of the time the student will get to campus and the parent will be like, oh, let me show your Dexcom data. And they're like, no, I'm not comfortable with that. And the parent kind of freaks out. Well, what do we do if you go low? So I think having that plan in place, like Courtney and her mom have in place, that allowed your data at night. And if you're low for 15 minutes, I'm going to do this. And if you're low for 30, I'm going to do this. I'm going to start calling your roommate. And then after your roommate, I'm going to call campus security. I think that is a really, really good plan to have in place, just kind of outlining the steps you as a parent are going to take in case of an emergency. So it does get a little bit rocky when the student kind of says, I'm not comfortable sharing my data, and the parent says, no, that's absolutely not up for discussion, because that's kind of where the tensions come in. But it really just is up to the student ultimately for what they're comfortable with. And if they're not comfortable sharing their data, that's up to them. And I think at that point, parents just make sure with them that they have a plan in place. Are you waking up every night to check blood sugars? What times are you going to wake up? Do you have a plan in place for if you do wake up and you're really low and you can't treat it yourself? So the most important thing for this kind of debate is to have a plan in place, depending on what the student and the parents were comfortable with.
It's incredible to think about, too, that Dexcom Share, which was the first easily available, commercially available way to see these numbers remotely, has only been around for 3 years. It's incredible to think about how in such little time we've gotten so used to it. It seems like it's been there forever, but it really hasn't been. I mean, boy, Courtney, you had it right in time for college, good or bad.
Exactly, right? Yeah, and we like to tell parents that too. If your child doesn't feel comfortable sharing their Dexcom data, think about all the students before them without Dexcom that went through it totally fine. I like to say all the time, for what you're saying about social media and how people's fears are kind of like multiplied because you are seeing everything on social media. For every horror story you see on social media, there's 1,000 success stories. So I think that's just good to keep in mind for parents.
Yeah, it really is. And people never post normal day. Everything's fine.
Exactly.
You only hear the best and the worst.
Exactly.
Courtney, you are senior. Big year this year. Have you changed your routine diabetes-wise since freshman year? I'm wondering if, looking back, you've got any advice for the incoming class this year to help make their lives easier.
I don't think I've changed my routine so much, but I have kind of noticed myself getting more involved in the supply ordering and monitoring how many supplies I have. And if I'm out shopping, I'll grab an extra thing of glucose tabs. And I'm starting to talk about the whole, like, insurance thing with my parents. So I think my routine somewhat is still the same. I'm just a lot more in tune with the overall picture.
And Karlyn, could you talk a little bit about what you might say to parents? Because it sounds to me like you've walked that line of letting go and being reasonable, and yet, acting in a way that most of us who are fearful would do, making those emergency phone calls when you need to. So I'm curious, I feel like you've been really successful so far. What would your advice be to other parents?
To just follow your gut. If you're feeling that you should pick up the phone and call, don't hesitate. One of the things Courtney and I talk about often is, she obviously has type 1 diabetes, and she's dealing with the day-to-day struggles of that and the stress of that. And when she first went off to college, it was about her, but it was also about us. Like, you can't just, I kept explaining to her, you're leaving like cold turkey, and all of a sudden I'm not going to be around you 24 hours a day anymore, and I'm not going to see what you're doing from hour to hour to help you manage all of this. So although it's difficult for you, I would say to Courtney, going off to college, it's difficult for your dad and I as well. So we need to work together and come up with a plan that's going to make us both feel comfortable. And that's what led us into our plans for the nighttime lows and, not calling during the day anymore. So just communicating and letting your child know how you feel as well, because let's face it, we make it all about our kids that have type 1 diabetes, but they really need to think about how we feel as well. And she's giving me a face right now as I say that. But it's true. It's true. And we actually had a little bit of a struggle when she would come home for winter break, freshman year, and then spring break. And all of a sudden she would be home for a week or two, and then she would go back to school, and I would slip right back into texting her and calling her every 15 minutes or every hour saying, should you change your site? Your blood sugar's been high. Should you do this? Should you do that? And she said, Mom, you're doing it again. So we then also came up with a transition plan, which I think is important, that after winter break, spring break, or summer, right before she goes back to school, I said to her, I need you to give me 2 weeks. Can you give me 2 weeks to transition to you be back to school on campus? Let me text you, let me do my thing, and then over the 2 weeks, I'll back off a little bit and then let you go do your thing. And she agreed to it, thankfully. So we do, that transition period helps, but communication is just key.
Stacey, I'll let you kind of have the last word on this. Tools and advice from CDN. You've got to have so many resources to help parents, ease into this as well. I know you have stuff there for the kids, but you have resources for parents who feel like they need help letting go.
Definitely. We have tons of resources for parents. And it is really hard for the student to see sometimes that it can be equally as hard for the parents to kind of let go. But luckily we do have lots of resources. So our main resource right now is our Off to College booklets. We have one version for students and then one version for parents. That's super, super helpful and has all the tips and all the tricks and just all the considerations that you might not have thought about being a parent who's sending a kid to college. And then on top of that, we also have lots of resources on our website, and we have our Facebook group for parents, which is super active. Like I said before, like a lot of parents will bounce these ideas off each other and just kind of look for support on that page, and it really, really helps them to just know they're not alone and they're going through the same thing. So we definitely do all we can to support the parents because we know that it's just as hard for the family when these kids go off to school. Also, what they said about kind of navigating breaks at home, that's so good that they brought that up because it's such an overlooked part of that relationship. And we actually recently, we've been kind of creating resources for families around navigating those breaks at home because it can be kind of confusing for parents and students when students are home for breaks because parents are kind of wondering how much care do I take back over since they've been managing all on their own, or should I back off and not ask them about diabetes and not talk about it? So we have a lot of resources for that on our website and in our Off to College booklet as well about navigating those breaks, which is really important.
Well, thank you all so much for coming on and talking to me about this. We could go on and on, but I appreciate your time. Courtney, have a great senior year. Come and check back with us. And that'll be
Absolutely. Thank you.
Of course. And then when you really move out, we can do a whole other show on young professionals who no longer live at home.
Absolutely.
You're listening to Diabetes Connections with Stacey Sims.
More information about much of what we talked about at diabetes-connections.com and in the show notes. Now, I picture our audience split with a lot of parents saying, that's going to be me, and I'm going to be texting all the time, and I'm going to be calling. And then, as I said in the interview, half of the audience is college students saying, no way, get out of my face. These conversations need to happen. And I hope that you, as you listen, find the balance that works for you. I do want to follow up and just read you the list of the top 10 fears, because we did go through the top 5, but I realized we never really finished the list. So let me go from 10 down to 1, and you heard the top 5, but 10 was grades being effective, DKA was 9, unhealthy diet, not staying on top of care, 7, glucagon, 6, running out of supplies, sick days, parties, alcohol, and then nighttime lows, number 1. There also were some worries about mental health, unable to find help in emergency, not standing up and advocating for oneself, playing sports and navigating that. So if these are fears that you have, you're in good company. But at the same time, these are also fears and issues that can be addressed with help from the experts, one of which is the College Diabetes Network. So I would urge you to check that out and know that you're not alone, and know that these things can be dealt with. And when Benny goes to college, as I said, my daughter will be next year, but I know it's not the same experience as a child with type 1. So when Benny goes, you can all come back and laugh at me for not doing everything I said I would or wouldn't do. But come on, I have a couple of years left. I mean, I've got all of high school to get through with him. We haven't even gotten to driving yet. We haven't even gotten to 9th grade yet. Okay. All right. In our Know Better segment this week, a little bit more about college, but mostly about what happens when your child turns 18. Can you still help in a medical emergency? Know Better is brought to you by No Foods. They have a new, better cookie. This is great because I've been talking for months now about how much I like the cookies, but how big they are too. So they now have a snack size cookie. And, when we say cookie, this is a lower carb, gluten-free version of a great cookie. It comes in chocolate chip, which I love, cinnamon, which is great, and lemon. My husband and my son like lemon. I would much rather have chocolate. But hey, there's something for everyone. In addition to all the other great products that they offer, these are the bready items that a lot of us can no longer eat for whatever reason or choose not to eat. But you can still have your wraps and your croutons and your waffles and your pancakes and your cereal and your breadcrumbs. Know Better. You can find out more at diabetes-connections.com. Click on the No Foods logo and always use the promo code Stacey10 at checkout to save. One of the subjects that came up doing some research for this episode was that once your child turns 18, you as a parent have no more right to obtain medical information than about a stranger on the street. And that is true even if your child, over 18, is covered under your health insurance and even if you're paying the bill. Now, there's a little bit of wiggle room here. A medical provider can choose to disclose protected health information without the patient's authorization if it serves the best interest of the patient in their judgment. But that is very much case by case, and the providers will almost always come down on the side of patient privacy, especially if they've never met you. I'm going to link up a couple of articles on this that I think are absolutely terrific. The upshot is there are 3 forms. You need HIPAA authorization, medical power of attorney, and durable power of attorney, and that will help the involvement of a parent or another trusted adult, a guardian or a trusted adult in a medical emergency. And if they're going to college out of state, if they're living out of state, you may have to fill out forms in your home state and the school state. The school may even have its own form. So there is a lot of information here, but it can help in an emergency. And especially if your child is over 18 and still on your health insurance, do not think that you will be able to help and get access in a medical emergency. So I'll link up all the forms you need in the show notes. And I think I'm going to put this separately in the Facebook group too. You can always join the Facebook group. It's Diabetes Connections, the group. I think this is really important. I just want to make sure the information gets out there. And now you know better. I said at the beginning of the show that I had a parenting moment of which I was not proud. I'm going to share that with you now. And I'm doing so because I think it'll help. It certainly helped me. As you know, if you listen, we recently started the Basal IQ, the software update from Tandem. We also had an issue with our pump not charging. We had to get a new one. We had to get the software reloaded. But over the Labor Day weekend, Benny was invited to a sleepover. He does these frequently. It's not too much of an issue anymore with diabetes. I trust him. He knows what he's doing. We have systems. This sleepover was a little unusual because it started at 3 p.m. in the afternoon on the lake. We live pretty close to a lake where people boat and swim and fish and the whole thing. And, of course, that was a lot of fun. But you know, right? You're on the lake all afternoon, and that can mean some wonky blood sugars later in the day. Now, because of Basal IQ, I'm thinking this is great. We can test it out. It's going to keep him from going low or at least help overnight. This is going to be terrific. But then, of course, I'm thinking, oh my gosh, he's going to be in the lake. I kind of thought summer was over. I'm not, my kids are back in school. I'm not thinking about, the adhesives and stuff falling off anymore. I had a couple of stay put overlays left. This was the only thing that has ever worked for us. We're very lucky. Most of the time, the Dexcom has stayed on Benny's skin in the water. But we can't put anything over it. We've tried, Opsite, and we've tried Griff Grips, and we've tried Rock Tape. I don't want to go through all the brand names here because I'm not slamming anybody. Everyone's skin is different, and when you find something that works for you, that is what works for you. But Opsite Flexifix tape had worked the best for us, but it still wasn't that great. And then finally, I sent some Stay Put to him at camp, and he said it was amazing. So I had 2 left. I had one with a Dexcom cutout and one with an inset cutout. And I asked Benny to please put that on the night before the party, so that would have lots of time to go. I was getting a little aggravated with him that day because between the pump failing and, the site changes that we had to do, he was doing great. Looking back, I wasn't really being very fair, but he was putting things off. I'll do it later. I'll do it at this time. And I've actually let him be very independent almost for a year now. If he says I'm going to do it by 7, I leave him alone. He does it at 6:59. You know how kids are, but he does it. But I was getting agitated, put the thing on because I wanted to get as much time before the water. Well, finally, at like 10:30, he came up to my room and he was talking to my husband and they were joking around. They were looking at a video and blah, blah, blah. And I was, I'm going to go to bed. Can you please put it on? So he peels it off and he's still talking to my husband and he's distracted. And he's trying to, do you need any help? No. He's trying to put it on the back of his arm. It's hard to see. I mean, you know how this goes. And of course, the whole thing he didn't even get it close to his arm. He peeled it off. He was talking. He was goofing around and it got all messed up and he crumpled it up and threw it away. I lost it. He didn't know that I only had one left looking back and that it had the pump inset cut out already in it. He's thinking, there's a stack of these. I was so in the moment angry and crazy pants. And I don't usually yell. I don't usually yell about diabetes. I said, Benny, what did you do? And everybody, my husband and my son, they both looked at me. I said, you wasted that. How could you do that? What is wrong with you? I'm embarrassed telling you, I'm getting all warm here in my home studio. So Benny looked at me and he was so hurt. He left. He just left the room. And my husband said, are you okay? What was that? We don't have any more. What is he thinking? It's going to come off in the lake. Tomorrow's going to be a disaster. And my husband said, you haven't even had the Basal IQ for a week. He was fine without it. He'll be fine without it if it happens. He's gone to sleepovers before. He's gone to sleepovers before he had Share. Get a grip, lady. And I thought, oh my gosh, what have I done? So I took a deep breath. I went in. He was really upset. I apologized. We talked through it. And I admitted I was wrong and it was just in the moment and I was worried. And then, he was fine. I was fine. I mean, I was really wrong and I apologized and I fessed up. But the next day we had a really good discussion about supplies because I realized that, as your kids grow up, obviously they're ready for more information. And with diabetes, I feel like I'm shielding Benny all the time, right? I'm not going to tell him how much things cost, and I realize I haven't told him how much supply we have of anything. If you recall, I think I shared he came home from camp and didn't tell me he had only one Dexcom sensor left. I think he was under the impression that we would open the cabinet and 47 would fall out on us. He wasn't thinking because I never asked him to. So we sat down and we had a really mature discussion where I shared what I think was age appropriate in that, look, you don't need to worry about ordering these or paying for these. These will be there when you need them. But it's important that you don't waste them, or you try not to waste them. But it's also important that you recognize I won't be upset if it falls off in the lake, if you bang it on a door jamb and it falls off, if you lose it. He has done that over the years. I mean, he's had a pump since he was 2. We've lost everything. We've almost lost the pump. He left it in the grass when he was like 6 or 7 years old after playing football at my neighbor. We're over there with a flashlight looking for it at 9:00 at night. So he has lost things. Thankfully, we found it. And he knows that we will replace it. I've always said you can't get in trouble with diabetes or for diabetes. But I don't think he realized that there wasn't an infinite supply. And after we talked about it, he said, well, that makes a lot of sense. And he decided that he was going to use some vet wrap instead of the leftover inset cutout on the stay put. I said, we can probably make that bigger with an X-Acto knife. And he's like, I'll just use some vet wrap. Not that that's ever worked in the past either. And he went. We also agreed that this would be the first time that I would only check in once, unless something was going on. But normally at a sleepover, especially if it's pretty much all day, he'll check in meal times. I'll kind of help him still figure out and swag, what he's eating, or make some bedtime decisions next morning. And we said, you know what? You're old enough for this discussion. You're old enough to do this yourself. I'm going to check in with you at 9:00. And I would text you good. And all he had to do was text back, I'm good. And that's what we did. Now, of course, I was looking at the Dexcom a lot, mostly to make sure that I still had a signal. I figured, it's going to come off in the water in about an hour or 2 minutes or whatever, but it stayed on. The vet wrap fell off. We have no luck with that. I know a lot of you love it and keep sending it to me and tell me how to use it, but this is the wrap that can go around your arm. It just comes right off of him. So we're obviously doing it incorrectly, but he did stay on the whole time. They had a great time. They had junk food, of course. I don't know what they ate. It was somebody's birthday. They had cupcakes, and he did great. He did great. And we checked in that one time. You good? I'm good. And then the next morning, I picked him up and he was super happy, really grateful to have been given that opportunity. And I was really proud of him. So I'm not proud that I lost my temper. I kind of pride myself on not losing it over diabetes. I get emotional sometimes, right? But I don't get angry. But man, I was so frustrated. But it helped me work through some issues that we probably needed to address. I know this is a long episode, but I appreciate you staying with it. And thanks for listening to my story. Do you have a familiar one? I mean, does it sound familiar to you? You can always drop me a line, Stacey at diabetes-connections.com. I don't have to share your story if you just want to vent, or you can certainly talk about it in the Facebook group as well. I know I'm not alone. And if you've ever lost your temper over diabetes, I just want you to know that you're not alone either, but to recognize, where is that coming from? And can we help make it better for us and for our kids? Like I said, long episode, which means I'm very thankful for my editor, John Buchanan from Audio Editing Solutions. He is back from vacation. And after editing last week's episode myself and having some technical issues, John, I am thrilled to have you along. Thank you so much for coming back. I don't know what I'd do without you. Thank you so much as you listen. Great ideas. I'm getting feedback all the time from you now, and I so appreciate that. We have so many awesome shows coming up, lots of technical stuff, lots of device updates, and of course, we will be adding in the inspiring and the everyday as it comes to our attention. Thanks again for joining me. I'm Stacey Sims. I'll see you back here next week.
Diabetes Connections is a production of Stacey Sims Media. All rights reserved, all wrongs avenged.